He was my grandpa, my blood, and I will always love and remember him. I remember an old man, a front man, telling me, "Your grandfather was the best Russian Tsar."
Well, he could have been a prophet. Once he said that the past belonged to God. What did he mean by that? Did he mean that only God could judge everything and seculars could not? This strange saying, on second thought, gave him the right to do everything he wanted. You know, there often occurred such situations when you have to come out and say something in public in his defense. In his defense? In defense of Stalin? Me? I will never do this. Just because he doesn't need to be defended. He was a pretty smart man. He did understand what he was doing. Otherwise, he would have never said a phrase like this. There will be a lot of trash and faded leaves on my tomb, but many years afterwards, all this rubbish will be blown away by the wind of history. I don't mean, you know, I saw an angel once in my life. That was Losif Vizarnovich. I'm not saying this. All the guilt remains on his shoulders.
He was so affectionate. For one thing, I was very much surprised he was not a giant as portrayed in posters. He was as high as I am. But when he put on his greatcoat with epaulets and a peak cap with the emblem, he became absolutely different. My mother told me that when she saw him first, he was very nice looking. He was slim, black-haired with sparkling eyes. He was so charming. I'm always criticized for saying this, but this is the truth. Why make up different epithets if he really was a most charming man? He was the first to teach me to drink wine. Just imagine, everyone is sitting around the table. There's a glass in front of me, and it is empty. They pour wine to everybody except me. I asked to pour some wine to me. Once we were alone together, there was nobody in. We could not find Svetlana anywhere, and we spent a lot of time together with him. When tea was served, he said, "Let the mistress pour out the tea," and pointed at me. At first, I spilled the tea, which was rather confusing. The tea was on the saucer, and it looked awful. But he pretended he had not noticed anything. I was amazed. I imagined what would happen if Mother or Svetlana noticed it. That would be a scandal. Then I was insulted by his death. I had a feeling that he had given short to me. We could have talked to him, and suddenly all was broken off.
Stalin is known to have died in his summer residence in Kuncevo, and his body was taken from there to our laboratory to be dissected and embalmed. When I came, his body had already been brought to the laboratory. There were a lot of guards everywhere. I was checked and let in, and there I saw Stalin for the first time in my life. I gained a painful impression because at the time, Stalin was a living picture of God. And there I saw him lying dead on the table. We extracted the organs from the body and gave them to the pathologists to be analyzed. The experts examined the organs, made a description of them, extracted pieces from the organs to be thoroughly analyzed. He had had an extensive hemorrhage. Afterwards, the pathologists pointed out that the hemorrhage and the changes found in cerebrum were not compatible with life. No, I don't know. I wouldn't stick to any version except the accepted one. The person was old and ill, and he had a stroke. He needed help but couldn't get proper treatment for 2 days. And he died. When everything was over, the work was done. We had to dress the body before placing it into the coffin. His tunic was brought in. The tunic seemed to be one he had worn, as it was not new. His boots were also brought in. When I saw the boots, I asked the military man that had brought them a question. I think this military man was one of his adjutants or servants. I don't know exactly. Well, I asked him, "Why did you bring the old boots?" And he said he didn't have any other boots. He had always worn them.
I was a big girl already. I was not supposed to cry. But when the music started to play, it was the Sixth Symphony by Tchaikovsky. The music seemed to stream. I couldn't restrain myself.
When he was born, his parents had a genetic bug. This is a disease called Erb's disease, which originates from the genetic bug of the parents. Such a coincidence is rather rare. So as a result, since he was born, his left arm had been drying out. And later on, his arm was becoming more and more weak, and it was difficult for him to stir it. He suffered from sharp rheumatic pains. All his joints ached, and the skeleton itself was diseased. He could hardly bend his left arm. It was so weak. In the middle of his life, at the age of 50 or 45, he could hardly lift a tobacco pipe or a cigarette with the left hand. And so it was. He constantly complained of neck pains and suffered a lot from jaw pains. He used to complain of jaw pains, and there was another disease of his, if I can say so. Well, it was not exactly a disease. It was a heritable deflection. He had had this deformity since childhood. His left foot didn't function normally either. He had talipes. And he wore his boots not because it was fashionable at the time, though you know, for this reason as well. But the main reason was that he had to wear them due to the physiology of his. His boots are said to have been made specially to fit the anatomic peculiarities of his. The thing is, his left foot toes were accrete. He suffered from tuberculosis. This was the first, the most dreadful disease of the time, which mowed down one and all. Almost all revolutionary men suffered from tuberculosis, and he was ill with tuberculosis almost all his life. A strange thing happened to him. He was from the South, from the Caucasus, and was in exile many times. In 1917, officially, he was in exile 6 times. And 5 times he escaped. He was exiled to Siberia, eastern Siberia, and the climate there is very inclement. Seemingly, he should have died there. It sounds strange, but the Siberian climate cured him. And many years afterwards, he would speak about it with much pride. He would tell about his last exile to Kuriet, a settlement 80 kilometers away from the Arctic Circle. The exile lasted from mid-1914 to the end of 1916. Those years were remarkable for harsh winters. Once there was a blizzard and he thought he would die. He got lost and feared he would not find a way out. It was a kind of miracle that he got on the right road. He believed it was a gift of fate. Something miraculous let him out. After this incident, when he nearly froze to death and thought that it was the end, the disease, tuberculosis, he suffered from receded.
Well, first I would like to say that he had an extremely difficult childhood. They were so poor. His father was a drunkard that beat both him and his mother. Then this boy became older and started to defend his mother, squeezing between her and the father. He was 10 years old or something around. His father, a drunkard and a debauchee, fell on the mother, and the boy threw a knife at him. After the incident, he had to hide for a long time. The neighbors hid him. He had such a terrible childhood. They lived in grinding poverty.
Typhus is a disease of the poor. In childhood, he suffered from relapsing fever twice. That was a serious illness widely spread in the Caucasus. This is well known. 2 brothers of Losif were believed to have died from typhus when they were still babies. At least this is what the family legend tells. And he suffered from relapsing fevers as well, though he was ill with it when he was older. I believe that was quite a wasting disease. Since that time, he had marks on his stomach. He suffered from stomach aches all his life. He suffered from chronic diarrhea. Yes, he did have it. He always suffered from diarrhea. It is so strange. The 20th century was the century of dictators. All of them were strong and fearful people. They all stepped over people's bodies. Hitler, Mussolini. Do you know they all suffered from stomach aches? Amazing, isn't it? Hitler had stomach aches as well. Mussolini was not able to eat anything. He had always suffered from stomach aches. I believe this happened due to the pressure they were under. Losif Vissarionovich, for instance. Stomach aches appeared when he fought against the opposition. He is known to have been a strong-willed person, and I think this is a plain truth. And unlike many emotional Southerners that immediately put into words everything that dwells upon them, he managed to keep himself in hand. Losif Vissarionovich, though a Caucasian, was different. He kept himself under control when needed. He always knew how to restrain. He is said to sometimes have fallen into unbridled anger when he was with his family and would cast off all restraint. This fact is well known too. It's all quite natural. I can understand him. The determined character of his helped him to achieve success in many respects. The more victories he scored, the more he achieved, the more he tried to seem unshakable. He pretended to be a fighter in all respects and a lucky man. And he was lucky indeed. At least before the war, he had achieved a glorious triumph and political victories. He gained the upper hand over his opponents. He left all the enemies behind. He came to power all of a sudden, so rapidly and unexpectedly. Actually, he became the head of state in mid-1923, a year and a half after he became an absolute ruler, a dictator.
To Very Reverend Seraphim, an Archimandrite confessor, the head of Tiflis Orthodox Theological Seminary, a member of Georgian Senate office. A humble request of mine. My mother is in distress. She has neither movables nor immovables. She survives and maintains me by backbreaking work, which she is often unable to find. In this connection, I humbly beg you to give out to me winter clothes and thus make my mother's life easier. I hope you will be merciful and help me to save myself from cold and diseases. Iosif Dagashvili, the petitioner.
The Very Reverend Seraphin, an Archimandrite confessor, the head of Tiflis Orthodox Theological Seminary. Your Very Reverend knows about the difficult situations my mother found herself in. I am in charge of her. My father has not taken care of me for 3 years already. My mother has spoiled her eyes, and therefore she can do no handwork anymore. This was our only source of income, so she can no longer pay the 40 rubles for my education. Therefore, I throw myself at your feet again, and I humbly beg you to let me study at public expense. Thus, you will show the greatest mercy to me. Well, there's a letter written by a woman in 1938. The letter is written on poor quality paper. It's addressed to Stalin. She writes the note in a peculiar language, and apparently she's uneducated. She writes that she has a relative. Well, she's not exactly a relative. She's an ex-wife, sorry. The ex-wife of her nephew. The woman pleads she's the daughter of Stalin. In accordance with her plea, she writes in a most peculiar way. I have no idea whether it's true or not, but I do not think she's telling lies. She does look like you, but perhaps she is not your daughter. I'm trying to be precise. Perhaps she is your niece, or somehow related to you. She knows your grandma very well, and what is most important, she has got pictures. The pictures of you and her mother died, and you were acquainted with her when you were young. Please note that you share traits with her. She is as beautiful as you are. Here comes flattering words. Her husband died, and she is in a very difficult financial position now. She was evicted from her flat, and she moved to me. She comes to your office hoping to be received every day. She gave the photos and notes written by your hand, or somehow related to you, to the secretary, but there is still no answer. Yesterday, she went out and never came back. Strange note, isn't it? It was in the KGB archives. There's also an accompanying form. There's a slider. Well, not exactly a slider. A small note written in pencil by an Ivanov, a high-ranking official from the People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs. He was a general, a commissar of Commissariat of Internal Affairs, if my memory serves me right. It is addressed to Pashkrevyshev. It says, Comrade Pashkrevyshev, we received the following note. Please pay attention to it. So it was. And the most interesting thing is that there was no instructions appended, nothing more, just a postscript to the archives. Here, a question arises. First, if she was just an imposter, a madwoman, why keep the note in the archives? They would have simply thrown it away. Nobody would have kept it in the archives. Second, it's hard to imagine that in mid-1938, at the height of the repressions, someone could have engaged in such a swindle. The thing is, she writes that in 1917 this woman was 18 years old. She was born when Stalin was expelled from the theological seminary. Thus, it becomes clear why he was expelled. It becomes evident why he had to leave. He wrote he had been expelled for the revolutionary activities he was engaged in. Why? There was no revolutionary activity. When in seminary, Stalin was not engaged in any revolutionary activity. Stalin was 21 years old when he was expelled. A grown-up man, if you will excuse the expression. I know a lot about his future life, and I cannot say he had no love affairs. Well, I cannot be 100% sure, as I have no strong evidence, but I think he was expelled for that reason.
Я выскажу одну вещь, такую бредовую совершенно. Понимаете?
I will tell you a thing that could seem crazy to you. Is there any sense to study theology if there's no chance to become God? Do you understand what I mean? There is God already. It is worth studying there. He read a lot of books about the czars, power, and lack of power. I figure he conducted a search in other fields as well. Perhaps he's not aware he was in search of leadership, but so it was. There was something in him. He strove to become the first at any price. He was eager to be the best.
There started the life of an underground revolutionary man. He had nothing. He didn't even have a home. His first wife died of typhus. Ekaterina Svandais, his wife, was a charming, beautiful young lady. They had a small kid named Yasha. They lived in poverty. All was very modest. And he was always out. Everlastingly was jailed or exiled, and so on. He was in jail 4 times and escaped thrice. When he was jailed for the 4th time, the revolution occurred. Such how he was released. Therefore, the Aliev's family, my grandmother, and my grandfather took care of him. They used to send him tobacco and sugar to the Siberia.
The family was quite large, I must say. They had 4 boys and 2 girls. The family was a bit strange. Well, it's clear that the family was revolutionary. This means that the parents were constantly in jail, especially the father. And there was nobody to look after the children. They lived ajar. It was an unhappy family. This is because they were rather strange, especially the mother. The mother seems to have been of expansive nature. She might have had psychic problems, though I cannot be absolutely sure of this. This is what they write. I know she had love affairs, and sometimes she simply disappeared. When the boys grew up and already had families of their own, they found jobs and so on. The girls were still young. They were still teenagers. Well, one was 15, the other was 16. And here comes Akoba, and they were simply amazed as he liked to do things in a big way. Well, he was a Caucasian, wasn't he? He used to strut like a peacock. He was romantic and courageous. He had overcome all the difficulties and had spent 4 years in the God-forsaken hole, and he was a revolutionary man, a prominent figure. And sure, the girls were amazed. They looked at him with admiration.
They were of different upbringing. This I would like to stress. He was such a free Eastern man, and she had been a gymnasia student. She could play the piano and spoke French.
Imagine the situation. The revolution broke out. Trotsky, Kamenev were in full view, and they had a position of their own. All of them had Bukharin as well, not to mention Lenin. And Stalin didn't show up at the time. There was a committee, the Army Revolutionary Committee. There, you can see the signatures of all the outstanding Bolsheviks and commissars. There were no signatures of Stalin, however. Many people participated in different actions, and he didn't.
Olga Yevgenyevna, my grandmother, had Germans in her family, and she was very neat. She was rather austere and liked everything to be in their place. My mother would tell, hardly had she come and taken her hat and coat off, the grandma saw the mess in the corridor and ran there to tidy it up. He used to lie down on the bed and cover himself up with a fur coat. If the pork chop he was eating fell to the floor, he would simply raise it, blow off the dust, and say, never mind. After that, he simply ate the pork chop up.
He had lots of women. He had a lot of lovers at different periods of his life. He was ugly. I mean, his appearance. Each of his parts, in separate, was ugly, but when they were together, it was different. Besides, you see, he had the power, and his power was boundless. The power was embodied in this weak, lame, and strange creature, and sure, women were crazy about him.
I often think why my mother loved him. All the Alievs and my mother as well treated him in such way. You know, they simply felt sorry about him. You see, we say now that he was a grand figure and things like that. At that time, he was not grand. I do think they pitied him. She looked like a Georgian woman or perhaps a Greek woman, and he preferred towhead women. They say he liked Avdiova, the one that played the part of Carmen.
Every citizen of this country knows very well the name of Vera Alexandrovna Davidova, the soloist of the State Academic Bolshoi Theater of the USSR. That was a legend, a thrilling, well-sold legend. If you tell the truth, oh, you know he came, had lunch, slept, and read a newspaper. It's not interesting at all. Absolutely not. He came when 3 girls, 12 years old each, were in the mezzanine. He raped them all and they cried. After that, he threw them out into the chute. That is what is usually published in newspapers nowadays. It's quite clear. So I don't think he had an affair with her.
That was a long time ago, but I remember everything clearly. She gave performances in Tbilisi and said that Stalin had really paid attention to her once when they were at a reception. Everybody left, and she stayed for some reason. It so happened that she stayed. He came up to her and said, "I want you to become my wife." This happened after Nastia Sergeyevna had died. And she replied, "I love my son and my husband very much." Her husband was Georgian. "Because I do not like you." They say she was supposed to be given the rank of People's Artist, and after the incident, the rank was not given to her. I will always remember our dear and beloved Iosif Vissarionovich Stalin, saying that deputies should always be as truthful and honest as Lenin was. He pointed out that deputies should love people, as Lenin did.
We suspected the Valia Ishtamina that lived in the summer cottage. She could have been his lover. Why not? He was a man, she was a woman. Why not? Yes. She could have been his lover. I don't think there's something unusual in it. I do not consider it a crime. It is clear that he didn't stage any orgies with prostitutes, that is for sure. But if he liked somebody and wanted to seduce her, that is an absolute normal behavior. As for Ishtamina, well, there was no secrets in the story with this girl. In the circle of his closest acquaintances, he never concealed the affair, though he didn't highlight it either. Since 1934, he had another problem. First, he was not young. In 1939, he was 60, and at the age of 55 or 60, it's already hard to run after girls. But the fact that she was chosen under the control of People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs personnel seems quite evident to me. The reason why I think so is that everybody at that time were checked by People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs before hiring. Besides, she had a military rank. She was a KGB officer, though her rank was not very high. She was a major. At first, she was like a waitress. Then she left. She was reticent. She behaved very quietly there. Then, Svetlana Alalieva writes, "She was in fact a very merry and an easygoing person. This was a quality of great importance to Stalin. He valued it that she didn't bother him with nagging." I know that he loved women. I know what kind of clothes he preferred on them. A long, dark skirt with a light blouse. He loved the strict type of woman. Actually, the type of Nadezhda Sergeyevna. It was a very serious case when a delegation of the 10th Congress of the party went to the rebellion in Kronstadt. At the time, Stalin's wife was expecting a baby. Later on, Vasily was born. My parents were expecting me. My father said to Stalin, "Things look bad there, so if anything happens to me, please take care of my son." The action ended safely, but my father died in July 1921. Vasily Stalin was born 19 days after I had been born. My mother and Nadezhda Sergeevna knew each other very well. They were good friends. When my mother was ill or left for some place, I lived in their house. When Stalin went away with Nadezhda Sergeevna, they asked my mother to look after Vasily. So Vasily and I had two homes. I think that was in 1925 or perhaps in 1926. They usually worked together. Political bureau members and other people gathered together and worked sitting around a big table. There was a coffee table near the big table, and there usually was a tureen on it. In the tureen, there was usually some cabbage soup with cooked meat in it. Everyone who got hungry while working would come up to the coffee table, pour some soup into his plate, and get back to his working place.
Я в суп, который стоял, насыпал табак.
Once I accidentally poured tobacco into the soup that was in the tureen. To all appearances, everyone that tasted the soup found it rather strange. He immediately asked who had done it. Vasily and I were running about the room at the moment. He asked, "Guys, which of you poured tobacco into the soup?" "I did," my answer was. "Have you tasted it?" he wondered. "No, I haven't," I replied. "Taste it now and see what you have done. If you have made it better, if the soup you made is tasty, tell Karolina Petrovna, our housekeeper, to pour tobacco into soup each time she cooks it. Tell her it's good to pour tobacco into soup. And if it is not delicious, tell her that you have already tried to pour tobacco into soup and it was not good at all. Tell her this in case she wants to try. Tell her she'd better not do it." English workmen gave him a fowling piece as a present. He was an excellent marksman, by the way. His fowling piece hung between beams above his head. He was in town. Vasily and I came and took the fowling piece. We turned it around and around in our hands. The cartridges were kept in a box right there. They didn't try to hide anything from anybody in the house. We pulled the trigger, put cartridges in and took them out. Suddenly we heard a car pulling up to the house. We immediately put the fowling piece in place. He came in, said hello to us, went upstairs, and suddenly we heard a double shot. Well, we ran upstairs straight away. We saw him standing there.
Увидели, что он стоит.
The fowling piece was on the floor, and there were 2 tracks of shooting charge. His tunic was torn, and blood was dropping.
У него порван китель его, и капает кровь. Он сразу,
He said, "Lads, did you take the rifle?" "Yes, we did," we replied. "Yes, I can see that."
Видно, вы оружие не знаете. Мы, большевики,
You do not understand anything in arms. We, the Bolsheviks, seize power with arms in our hands.
Ефимову, коменданту, и скажи,
Go to Yefimov, the commandant, and tell him to teach you to handle all sorts of weapons you can find here.
здесь есть.
I was fortunate enough to meet both Stalin and Kirov. In Sochi in August 1934. My father was there. Stalin phones to my dad. "Come to our place. Kirov has come too. We'll have a meal." By that time, a manual of world history and a manual by Shostakov had been made ready. They had the dummy copies of them and were reading them through. Later on, they discussed the remarks each of them made. They studied the dummy copies in series. They discussed every historical period and epoch. The first remark regarding the manual by Shostakov was about the role of Christianity adoption in Russia. Stalin insisted it was necessary to take proper account of the cultural role of cloisters and churches. At the time, they were the center of literacy. Were they not? Yes, they were. So it was necessary to point that out. I also remembered another thing. They started reading about the epic of Catherine the Great. Stalin says, "Why do you think Catherine was great? She was great because she had the ability to choose strong men, her lovers, to rule the country. Potemkin, Orlov, Zubov. Do you understand?" Then there was a break, and Stalin, together with my father, went somewhere along the paths. Sergei Mironovich said to me, "Let's go blackberries picking." And so we went to pick blackberries. We gathered quite a lot of blackberries for everybody, and Stalin said, "See you near the Oak of Memory." There was a small hill near the summer cottage and an immense oak on it. It was a grand oak, and there was also a pergola there. That is all that was there. Do you happen to know what Oak of Memory is? The name appeared in the Gospel. So this is from the Gospel. Christ gathered his like-minded people there. That's the way. When our meeting was over, Kirov, who had been staying at the health center of the Lenin Council in Hofta, left for the place. My father and I had been spending our holidays in Sochi. Stalin says, "I'll see you off." He got into the car. We had a 7-seater, but I am not sure about the model. I think it was a Packard or a Buick, though I do not remember exactly. I sat into the front seat, next to the driver. They sat in the back talking. It was getting dark already. Suddenly, we saw two girls at a turning. The driver stopped the car, and the girls sat into the middle seats. They said, "Take us to Sochi." So we went to Sochi. Well, I was sitting in the front seat and heard one of them saying to the other, "Stalin is sitting in the back." We brought them to Sochi. They got out of the car, and we said goodbye to each other. There was no commissar in the car, and there were no cars convoying us. That is because the situation in the country was still calm.
Ничего. Потому что такая была обстановка в стране еще.
But it became absolutely different since 31 December 1934. He sobbed bitterly after Kirov died. I cannot believe he eliminated Kirov. I do not believe one bit that he eliminated Mayakovsky either. It's all bullshit. As well as the story with Solikov having written The Quiet Dawn. This is all rubbish some people used to profit in. No, I believe he suffered a lot after Kirov had died. The fact that all his life he kept thinking about the death of Nadezhda Sergeevna Aleluyeva cannot be ignored either. It is not a simple trifle. He kept talking about the pistol that Pavel, her brother, had given to her as a present. I mean the pistol she shot herself with. I have never believed Stalin could have shot her.
He would start saying, "Just think, it was such a small pistol of hers. Pavlusha bought it to her." He meant Pavel Sergeevich, her brother and my uncle. He brought the Walter from Germany for self-defense because she used to walk along the streets. And she was a good markswoman, my mother, I mean. But this pistol played a fatal role in her life, and my father used to say, "What a present he gave her, what a terrible present." So we couldn't understand how she could have done this. They said she had done it because she had been sick. When I grew older, my aunts told me something about her. They used to say that she really had been sick. Moreover, she had been depressed.
У Надежды Сергеевны были сильнее.
Nadezhda Sergeyevna suffered from headaches. Migraine drove her to despair. We went to the parade on the 7th all together. Nadezhda Sergeyevna, Vasily, and I. At the time, the parade started at 8 a.m. and finished at 12 a.m. At 4 p.m., weapons and equipment were demonstrated. 15 or 20 minutes after the parade had started, she cried, "Oh, I cannot stand it anymore," and she left. She couldn't stand anymore.
They lived in a peculiar way. We were there during the November holidays. Suddenly the telephone rang. This occurred when Nadezhda Sergeyevna had shot herself. Carolina Vasilyevna, the housekeeper, she was German, said, "A disaster occurred. Come immediately." When they came, Nadezhda Sergeyevna's body had already been washed and put down onto the bed. They decided that if anybody asked, they would say she had died naturally. He was so furious that they realized they had to think of a legend of her death. At first, they insisted she had died of appendicitis. Then they used to say that she had died of cardiac rupture. The term was often used at the time. When I was much older, I was told she had shot herself. He suffered a lot. She was gone. It is so hard for a man of Eastern type to realize his wife has committed suicide. My father felt it had been treason. It was like she had stabbed him in the back. He was a political figure, a leader. Members of the opposition claimed immediately he killed her, and this matter is still discussed.
He was sobbing. He was sobbing bitterly. He was trembling. Vasily tried to calm him down. "Daddy, don't cry. Daddy, please stop crying. Please stop." And he was trembling. The first thing that broke him down, if speaking of personal affairs, was the death of his first wife. You just look at the picture of Yakov. Look at the photo and you will see him in it with tousled hair. That was a disaster. They say she was very fragile. She was so kind and tender. And they presented a contrast, a certain counterpoint. And then again, Nadezhda and Kirov died. I feel that made him shrink into his shell, Eliot used to say. Thomas Eliot said that you should find your garden and close the gates behind you. That is what he did. He did it, as far as his personal life is concerned. In my opinion, since that time he never felt sorry for anyone. He hadn't been pitiful enough before, but since then, he didn't pity anyone. Stalin had guards that accompanied him everywhere he went and stood guard over him when he worked and had to rest. The group of his guards was called the Nine. That's why our 9th department also bears this name. This is because there were 9 of us in the group. 3 posts accompanied him. In each post, there were 2 people, so he was accompanied by 6 bodyguards. 2 people were attached to him. The total number is 8. But there was one more, Vlasik, who was the head of the department. Look, have you ever seen the film Sokurov? Lenin? You'd better not watch it. Frames are illegible there, and the guards are so annoying in the film. They spied and eavesdropped on everybody. We tried not to bother the one we guarded. He knew our posts and didn't find our presence trying. We had 2 gardens. There were several gardeners working for us. They managed to cultivate watermelons. We had so many watermelons, and they brought them to the Smolenskaya station to sell. Do you happen to know where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was? It was there at the corner. So in the green grocer there, our watermelons sold. He enjoyed gathering mushrooms. He used to dig them out. The most interesting thing is that I also found a mushroom like that. The workers that worked in the park had found out about his weakness for gathering mushrooms, and they brought the mushrooms and dug them into the soil everywhere in the park. When workers worked in the park, a guard should be there to keep an eye on them. God knows what they're doing. My friend Petrov told me a story. I'm on sentry duty, and I could see him coming up to me. I think of one thing only. He will come up, and I will greet him. Hardly had I thought of that, he continued, when he came up to me and said, "Good afternoon, comrade guard." I, he added, was stunned. "Good afternoon, comrade generalissimo." The nearby summer residence was very well guarded. It was fit out with the best equipment. If a hare runs across, it will be displayed at the control panel.
Мне докладывают, что охранник постовой.
Once they reported to me that a guard had found a bullet on the nearest path. It was stuck into the ground half a centimeter deep and was shining in the sun.
Немножко, так с полсантиметра, и торчит большей частью своей. На солнце блестит. I
questioned all the guards if anybody had heard a shot. Nobody had. I asked everybody. Nobody had heard anything. I examined the bullet and became sure that it was a rifle bullet, which had been spent. So it had no killing power. If it got into somebody's hand, they would feel mild pain and nothing more. Though the first thing we did was a ballistic examination. In a short period of time, the experts reported that the bullet had been fired out of a rifle from the Vorobyovi Hills. A new 26-story building for Moscow State University is being built on a high bank of the Moscow River in the Lenin Hills. New industrial methods of building are being applied here. New machines enlightened the hard work of the builders. It turned out that the university was being built with the help of prisoners. The brigade was guarded by soldiers. When a guard was relieved, it was necessary to unload the gun and fire a shot. This was a usual procedure. A kind of ritual. It so happened that one of them unloaded the gun, and instead of a blank shot, there shouldn't have been a cartridge in the gun. The gun fired. And the reason it fired was that the previous soldier hadn't taken the cartridge out, so the bullet flew to the summer residence.
In September, I always was in Moscow as I went to school. My father used to stay in his summer residence till October. He enjoyed spending September in the south. He used to send me branches of a tangerine tree in November. Can you imagine? A big branch of a tangerine tree with leaves and ripe tangerines in it. Tangerines or oranges sometimes. All this was carefully packed in a box. I was absolutely happy. Dear Dad, thank you for the letter and the peaches. The peaches were delicious and we ate them every day. Dad, you asked me what else you can send me. I don't need anything. At the weekend, I walked in the forest. The weather was marvelous. The weather was very good all the time, though today it is not so good. It is cold and it has rained several times. Bye-bye, my dear Daddy. I kiss you tenderly. Your Svetlana. Hello, dear Daddy. I was so happy the day I received your letter and the tangerines. I am so glad you are all right and are enjoying your time. Muscovites are not used to you being away, so there appeared rumors that you are very sick. They say you have sent for doctors, and in spite of myself, I started to fear you're really not well. Moreover, Muscovites have often been robbed and killed by some hooligans for the last half a year. The situation is quite serious, I am afraid, as even in central districts, in the Gorky Street, for instance, people are afraid to go out when it gets dark. Today, I have been informed that Stalin has made an order to eliminate gangsterism and larceny by the new year. If people ascribe anything to you, they ascribe only good things. Well, yes, I was accompanied by a guard when I went to school. Then when I went to university, I wasn't guarded anymore. This is because I said to my father, I cannot go to the university when followed by a guard. Well, all right, he said. The hell with you. Let you be killed. That is what he said. That was a joke of his. Well, I managed to stay alive. Of course, everybody in the university knew who I was, but I feel I was always protected by a guardian angel. He was rather strict with the sons because Georgians always expect something special from their sons. They expect perhaps too much. They want them to be exemplary. But unfortunately, his sons didn't justify his hopes.
You see, he used to rub their noses into all those things. He would say to his son, you are not a Stalin. Mark it well. You are not a Stalin. And I am not a Stalin. Stalin is out there. He is somebody absolutely different. I am your father, and you are my son. And he would often say to Svetlana, you're a sponger. You think that you can do everything you want, and many other things. He said that to Svetlana, that led a pretty modest life. He said that to the girl that had never been permitted to do what she wanted. And definitely he was quite disappointed at Yasha, his son. He was devastated with his marriages, with his attempts to commit suicide, with his excessive modesty, and so on. He did not want them to be modest. He wanted them to be, well, they didn't even know what he expected from them. And in my opinion, the reason why they were so modest was that they lacked his love and care. However, Svetlana feels she received something from him. Well, I think she did if compared to the others.
Well, if I can put it so, I was his favorite. I think this is because I was doing well at school and made no trouble to him until I was 16. And certainly he was quite happy, but he kept an eye on me. If he saw that I was dressed unusually, he would ask, "Is the dress you wear foreign?" I said, "No, certainly not." "Well, all right then. If it was made in this country, it must be good." He didn't like it when people wore foreign clothes. Another thing is perfume. Good gracious, perfume. I started to use perfume when I was 20. Before that, I hadn't had the right to use either perfume or any cosmetics. And I never had manicure done as well. You see, he reacted strongly on such things. He thought these were things one could easily do without.
To Comrade Martishev, the teacher, I've received your letter telling about the tricks of Vasily Stalin. I've been pretty busy, therefore I didn't answer earlier. Vasily is rather a spoiled young man. He's not always truthful, and he enjoys blackmailing weak-willed teachers. He does it to people of weak, or better to say, disorganized will. He was spoiled by different people that used to stress he was the son of Stalin. Vasily hasn't still destroyed himself, because there are teachers in this country that give no quarter to a whimsical baron's son. I advise you to be as strict with Vasily as possible. Don't be afraid of his false threats of committing suicide. Unfortunately, I have no chance to take care of Vasily, but I promise I will be teaching him a lesson sometimes. Иосиф Сталин.
Василий всегда боялся отца.
Vasily was always afraid of our father. He was afraid of him when he was a child. When he already was an Air Force lieutenant general and had many insignias, he was still afraid of his father. He trembled with fear when he saw him. Once, he was sitting on the edge of a chair when his father suddenly asked him a question. He asked him a question regarding Air Force and planes. He couldn't give an answer for some time. He started rushing around. Well, at the time, he was already drinking a lot and was rather nervous, but he was terribly afraid. He could not give an answer. Then Father asked, "Do you drink? Are you drunk? Do you have a hangover? What is the matter with you?" And Vasily could not say anything. That was horrible. I could not even look at him.
Это было ужасно было на него смотреть.
Он был большой ребенок.
Well, he was like a big child. Whatever they wrote about him, he was still just like a big child. He was sick, spoiled, but still a child. He died at the age of 41. He was still a boy when he got married to my mother. He was 19 at the time. They had lived together for 5 years when the war broke out. Since the time his adventure started. Well, I don't think he took the war as a tragedy. He took it a bit differently, I think.
Он командовал дивизией со мной. Вылетал на боевые задания.
He was in command of an aviation division. He completed combat missions. He got headlong into fights. There was a joke that Vasily had shot down a plane and started following him without seeing what was there behind him. That was a story told by Prokopenko.
Это рассказ Прокопенко, герой.
Well, the guy was a real hero, though he hadn't been given the rank of People's Hero of the USSR for a long time.
Может быть, что он дружил.
I think this happened because he was a friend of Vasily. So Prokopenko decided to help him to get rid of the Misar that was following him. He managed to do that and was punished after he landed. Though they didn't beat him, they just scolded. He became general only when the war was over. He was 25 years old at the time.
Почти 25 ему исполнилось.
And then he started drinking. This upset all his plans. And he did drink. He shouldn't have drunk into his shell. He shouldn't have tried to analyze himself. No way. I have remembered all my life what my mother said once. She tried to somehow bring him to reason, but all was in vain. Once he came up to the window. He stood there watching and smoking. He said, "Do you not understand, Galka, that I will live till my father dies?" When he was still young, Vasily never drank. I think there was something else. I feel somebody made him drink on purpose. Somebody who wanted to drink at his expense. He communicated with different people, and it so happened that he became keen on drinking. Once, we were in a summer house. This was after the war. He had already drunk a lot and was pouring some more. I said, "Vasya, stop, you've had enough." He replied, "Enough? Why?" "I have," he said, "only 2 ways out." He took out a pistol and showed it to me. "Can you see it? A bullet is my first way out. The second one is in this glass. I'll drink and I will feel relieved." You know that I will live until my father dies. When my father is gone, Beria, I will immediately eliminate me. Khrushchev and Melenkov will help him do that. And Bulganin is sure to help them in this case. Do you think it's easy to live knowing you might be killed any moment? To Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, personally, I consider it to be my duty to inform you about the state of health of Vasily Yosifovich. Vasily Yosifovich suffers from nervous exhaustion, from chronic gastric catarrh and anemia. The reason for all diseases is alcohol abuse. 16 November this year at 1 a.m., when Vasily Yosifovich was watching a film, he had an epileptic seizure. He was unconscious and had muscle convulsions. He bit his tongue and foamed at the mouth. Unfortunately, Vasily Yosifovich had been drinking heavily for the last 70 days. Therefore, he shows symptoms of intoxication. He has an aversion for food and has lost much weight. He is very irritable and doesn't sleep well. The doctor's demands to stop alcohol abusing had no effect at all. Please try to influence your son. Igorov, the head of the Kremlin Medical Department. I spoke to Vasily at the aerodrome in Tushino. I think it was an aviation festival. Stalin was being late. He went down the stairs to the platform. Then he came out. He descended the stairs there. It was in 1952. Vasily was in command of the parade, and I spoke to him there. Well, I must admit, he had been drinking cognac since morning, as I could feel the smell. The mission Stalin entrusted himself with was, well, the leadership at the time.
1931 год. Stalin
made a report. We are 50 to 100 years behind the leading countries. We have to catch up with them in 10 years. We have to do this, otherwise we'll be crushed. So if you add 10 years, you will see that he was right. In 10 years' time, it was 1941. By invitation of the USSR government, Mr. von Ribbentrop, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany, arrived in Moscow to discuss a number of questions concerning the situation in Poland. Mr. von Ribbentrop was met by Mr. Potemkin, the Deputy People's Commissar of Foreign Affairs, officials working for People's Commissariat of Foreign Affairs, and all officials of German embassy.
Конечно, Сталин был абсолютно
Well, of course, Stalin was sure that Hitler, the Germans, will attack the Soviet Union. That is for sure. And he did understand that there would be no help from the West. As before the First World War, there had appeared an idea to set us on to fight with the Germans. Geopolitics of Stalin and geopolitics of Hitler came into conflict. Hitler tried to somehow resolve the contradiction and bring unity. When the alliance was concluded, Hitler suggested they should divide spheres of influence. Well, this fact is well known. He suggested they build up an empire and divide the future empire into pieces. He suggested they should leave America, Latin America, in peace. Germany should have received Africa and all territories related to it, the Middle East partially. Russia should have received India and related territories, Iran, India. I figure Stalin found the suggestion quite alluring. Inwardly, he agreed, but outwardly, he kept playing. He was a normal person, a gambler, and he wanted more. When Hitler started to move the borders, Stalin decided that he has to receive the part he considered to be his. And there, the conflict started. Can you remember Finland and Romania? Hitler became more cautious. He decided not to make a compromise because he thought that Europe should belong to him. 19 June 1941, father came from Leningrad. He decided he should go on leave. It was summer, and people decided who would go on leave first, who would be the second, and so on. Father came to Stalin and said he had a feeling that the Germans were up to no good. He said they were burning some papers in German embassy and ash was flying everywhere. They were covering their tracks and were going to get rid of heavy things. Stalin replied, "The Germans have missed the best chance to attack us this year." It was well known that the Germans were to attack on the 15th of May. The fact is described in literature. And the conversation took place at the end of June. So the Germans missed the best opportunity for them to attack. So the Germans will not attack this year. They will do it next year. The Pravda published a radio report of Molotov June 23rd. Jumped up Hitler and all his bloody clique will see that our 2 million people country is solid and united. It is strange, but Stalin was right. If the Germans attacked on the 15th of May, nobody knows what would have happened to Moscow and Leningrad. They simply were short of time, having started at the end of June. Dvinsk fell. Minsk was on fire. The Germans rained down on Leningrad. I remember my father saying that Dvinsk fell and Minsk was on fire. Minsk fell 28th of June. It was all so hard for Stalin. Khrushchev said, "We have lost all that Lenin left for us." My father told me this. Well, there are two reasons. The first one is that Stalin took over the leadership, and since the time, he had had psychological problems. The second reason is quite clear to those that knew Josef Vissarionovich. He was psychologically broken. I feel this is quite explicable, because he had come to believe in his strength and his ability to predict future events. He was sure that he had the ability to beat Hitler, that he went off his head. Those days, he simply couldn't understand anything. It was so unexpected for him. He couldn't realize how he could have missed the Hitler's attack. And I do think he was hiding somewhere for some time. I figure he was psychologically broken. And I think at that time, he again suffered from stomach aches. He was staying at home for 20 days.
Die
In the Ukraine, the population regards the German soldiers as liberators from the Bolshevik reign and builds triumphal arches. The fleeting political commissars of Moscow, who plundered and oppressed the population, are again village eldest now. German tanks attacked Nikolaev. The first Soviet deserters. First interrogation of captured Bolsheviks.
There was a battle of Lozna in Belarusia. After the battle, my father disappeared. He disappeared and was among the missing people.
By the way, in the German rear, I met a soldier who said he was from Senior Lieutenant Dzhugashvili's battery. He added that they had had an artillery engagement. When the shells were over, they combated with light weapons. Then the battery commander started to hand-to-hand fight.
And then suddenly the Germans spread misinformation about him being held captive.
Do you happen to know who that is? This is Yakov Dzhugashvili, the eldest son of Stalin. Stalin's proper son showed it was all a lie. He yielded himself prisoner, and any resistance to the German army is worthless. Join us, too.
There appeared leaflets with his letter to father in them. He wrote he was all right, that he was fine. The handwriting seemed to be his. The results of examination showed it was not his writing. It was a simple falsification. It wasn't even written by a Russian. By whom? Well, by a foreigner, I guess. By a German, I believe.
It is a question of your son, Yakov, Comrade Stalin. The Germans suggest we should exchange him for Field Marshal Paulus via the Red Cross. No one exchanges a soldier for a field marshal. The slogans, for the fatherland, for Stalin, are just words. Attack is a foul language. There is no hoorah. There is nothing of the kind in an attack. All people become brutalized. Well, yes, when you get people ready, you say, for the fatherland, for Stalin. But these words can never be heard in an attack. Well, they might be, but it is quite rare. There is another thing. Once I combated. The battle was rather heavy. We were a success, but the conditions were awful, and I was a commander. After the battle, I came to the guys that had combated together with me and brought a 3-liter bottle with vodka to the lads that had performed the shooting. And I left. It was somewhat of a present from the commander to the regiment. The adjutant took the bottle to the soldiers. They poured some vodka to them, drank it, and sent the bottle back to me. There were no officers among them. They were only soldiers and a sergeant. There was a piece of paper stuck in the bottle. Dear Commander, we're ready to go through thick and thin to get to Berlin for Stalin and against Hitler. And the paper was signed by all of them. They weren't politicians. They were just soldiers.
Вера
Faith, Tsar, and the motherland. That was he who left the triumvirate, wasn't he? Well, he made some remarks. He removed faith in God and put Lenin into his place. He removed the Tsar and put Stalin and the motherland in his place. Is this not true? And he did all that quite cleverly. He was a person who didn't forget faith. He never forgot God or faith. He never got away from that. Perhaps, sometimes he did, but sometime later he flashed back. You remember Wise Berdiev's famous saying? Can you remember him saying that atheism is a way to God through the back entrance?
Дверь к Богу с черного хода.
When the war was over, he was already 66 years old, and he was very sick. I do not know for sure what he was suffering from. It is one of the Kremlin mysteries. Though all of his life he had suffered from stomach aches, he had always been dyspeptic. Besides, he had high blood pressure. He had a healthy heart, but after he had such stress, after the war, he looked much worse. He should have had rest after the war was over, but the war affected him a lot. It did this to many people. Well, of course, they didn't tell me anything. There was a big secret. I have no idea why it was so. Then the Zhadanovs told me. The Zhadanovs told me that everybody thought he was going to die, and Zhadanov would be the next leader. However, Zhadanov didn't want to be the next leader. He was a very sick man. He had a weak heart.
He was a man with a weak heart. So he didn't create tremendous political illusions for himself. He knew he was sick and didn't have enough strength. 1947. October magazine. There appeared one of my first articles titled, Human Influence on Natural Processes. The article dwelled on Vernadsky, on the person nobody was aware of at the time. Though he still is not a well-known person, in the article I paid attention to Michurin and Mendel and the geneticists. The article was published in July 1947. In August, I was enjoying my holidays in Sochi. Oh, sorry, that was not in August. That was in November. I was spending my vacation with my aunt, Anna Alexandrovna. It was raining when a person on duty ran up to us. He said, "Stalin asked you to come to him." We got into the car and started for Gagri. There, we had a very interesting talk. At the time, I worked as an assistant in Moscow State University. I was an assistant of academician Nezmianov, a chemist. He offered a different job to me. It was wonderful if you become a professor and later on an academician, he said sarcastically. But you have to get training in the party bureau. Then I got a job in the Central Committee in the Department of Science. Our main task is to make university education better. What do we start with? Let's build a number of buildings for Moscow State University. So there appeared a number of Moscow State University buildings in the Vorobyevi Hills. When I was already working in the Central Committee, I invited Alexander Nikolaevich Nezmianov. He was the head of the university. I said to him, Alexander Nikolaevich, I have the idea, the plan. We have to make a report on this theme for our governing body. We got the report ready and sent it to the governing body. From the Stalin staff, it was sent to different departments. Several weeks later, the Moscow Council and the Moscow City Committee invited us for a talk. What have you written? How do you imagine a 10 to 12-story university building? Lifts won't manage to take so many students up and down. It should be a 4-story building at most. This is what we were told. Well, all right, we don't mind a 4-story building. Let's go and choose a place to build the building there. We got into cars and started. We left Moscow and were driving through different kopses. We got to a settlement which was called Vnukovo. There was not an airport there yet. There was still a big field there. The officials said, so we will build a 4-story university building here. Some time passed. We were called to the political bureau, and Stalin said, there is a suggestion to build a university building. I suggest we build the 20-story building in the Vorobyevi Hills. We should provide every student with a room. How many students are there? About 6,000 students per year. So we should plan to build 6,000 rooms approximately. Myacheslav Mikhailovich Molotov broke into the conversation. Comrade Stalin, students will be bored to live alone. Let's plan to build doubles. All right, let there be 3,000 double rooms in the dormitory instead of 6,000. And there's one more thing I would like to pay your attention to. Let's think of the university material resources in other cities. So it all started. A university in Kharkov, a university in Voronezh, a university in Minsk. In 1934, my mother, my father, and I went to Stalin's place. There, I got acquainted with his children, Vasya and Svetlana. At the same time, I got acquainted with Yasha. I saw Yasha just once. I was at his place. He was so handsome. At the time, he was a student of the Dzerzhinsky Law Academy. It is well known that his life was tragic. Then I got acquainted with Svetlana. She had been a young girl before the war. After the war, we became friends.
А потом уже после войны встречались, и так сложились добрые отношения.
She liked him a lot. He really was a charming person. He was the life and soul of the party, as they say. He was so cheerful. He could play the piano and sing. He was a very good storyteller. As far as Yura Zhdanov was concerned, well, he always pushed her towards him. He used to tell her how good he was, and Yura's dad would push Yura towards Svetlana. He used to say she was so good, and she would say afterwards, you know, I think there wasn't a strong love between us, but everybody took us for a fiancé and a fiancé. And she told him, well, let's get married then.
We celebrated the event at home. We lived in the Kremlin at the time. My father had died already. My father died in 1948, and we got married in 1949.
So
when they say that Andrei Alexandrovich Zhdanov was a relative of Stalin, it is a historical mistake.
Dear Daddy, Yuri Andreevich Zhdanov and I decided to part on the New Year Eve. That was quite a well-considered decision of ours. For half a year, we have been neither married nor divorced, and he demonstrated to me that he didn't love me or care for me. He told me to leave our daughter with him twice, and there appeared financial issues I would like to talk with you about, because there's nobody else who can help me. I cannot live at Yuri Andreevich's expense anymore, and you know that I have 2 children.
Когда отношения наши, так сказать, испортились,
when our relationships became worse, he didn't approve of this.
И могу сказать,
This is quite understandable. She told me about it.
По-прежнему,
Though I can say that Svetlana and I remained friends.
Отношения со Светланой. И когда она уехала и приехала.
Then she left, and he always met when she came here.
И более того, когда
when I was a delegate of the 20th Congress and heard the speech of Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev at the private session, my first thought was that all this would apply to Svetlana the next day.
Я подумал, что завтра все это обрушится на Светлану.
I didn't go home. I went to her to warn her.
Чтобы ее предупредить.
You see, you might think I'm not impartial. Svetlana is a very peculiar person with a strong character, and her life was very difficult. But I adore her. I think she is a very smart person. She is so delicate and vulnerable. Oh yes, she can hurt anyone herself. That is for sure. But I liked her very much. I like to come to her place. I like to come to her summer cottage. I can still remember the smell that was in these rooms. There was some delicate aroma in these rooms. I liked the way she dressed. I liked the way she arranged her hair. I liked the way she talked. I liked the way she folded her hands and so on. She always possessed some unfailing charm, some irresistible charm.
I figure he kept thinking I was still a child. When I was 25 years old, he started talking about my mother. He talked about her death. I was so frightened. I couldn't bear this. I was so afraid he would start, well, we have always considered him to be very strong, and sometimes I felt he wanted to say something personal to me. And he did. He really wanted to pour out his heart. And I suddenly thought, oh no, I do not want it. I ran away from this.
Among the things that belong to Stalin, there are some mysterious ones. This summer coat, for instance. It's hard to imagine that among the clothes of the first figure in the country, there can be such a worn and adorned piece of garment. Here's his summer coat. He wore this uniform pretty rarely. There's a hat for this uniform. They were sewn pretty well. The boots of his are ideal. They are so light, they were surely made with love. There's a collection of presents kept in this wardrobe. There are presents that were given to him on the occasion of his 70th anniversary. This present was given by Brazilian communists. It is an unusual briefcase. Stalin was known to like tobacco pipes, and he had a collection of them. Our collection is not full. Besides, I think there were other collections. We have more than 20 pipes. So, knowing he liked tobacco pipes, officials presented him with them. This present could have been given to Stalin by Churchill. This present also seems interesting to me. It was made by Georgian jewelers. It was made by his 70th anniversary. It is a clasp knife. Quite unusual, isn't it? These are portraits of Stalin engraved in it. Here he is still young, and here he is a leader already, the leader of the country. I had a feeling Stalin was immortal. I felt he would never die. There were no borders to him. He was omnipotent at the time. He made a halo of a demigod for him, and one could not imagine he could die. When he was taken ill with flu, a doctor from the Kremlin hospital arrived. He prescribed medicine, made instructions, and left. Stalin called one of the guards, told the person on post that he should be provided with guards. Dictated the names of the same medicine the doctor had prescribed and told him to go to the country chemistry in the Moscow region to buy the necessary medicine. He didn't trust the Kremlin doctors. More than 20 doctors were already in jail. He was the one that started the doctor's case. He started the campaign that was supposed to end in big trial. It was meant to end in a trial bigger than the process in 1938. This case was investigated by the Injury Department of the State Security Ministry that investigated the most important cases. After the trial, people that had been next to Stalin for many years, had been his companions in arms, should have died or should have receded into the background. This concerned almost all the members of the political bureau of the time, including Molotov, Kaganovich, and Mikoyan, to a greater or lesser extent. And of course, this concerned Beria, because Beria was one of the most powerful members of the political bureau. Beria felt he kept an eye on all special forces, though it was not so. By the time, he was not a curator at all. Mostly, he was not in charge of anything. Well, Beria could have assisted in this business because he was the curator of the Kremlin hospital. It was the time for action, and the doctors that treated Stalin were also connected with him.
Beria талантливейший человек.
Beria was a most talented man. He was very smart and strong. He was a brilliant manager.
Ядерное оружие. Хотя бы.
He could have done a lot of things. The nuclear weapons, for instance. The first radio location, the missiles. He was in charge of this all. Marshal Yakovlev, the head of our main artillery department. He became deputy people's commissar afterwards. And a deputy minister of defense later on told me once, when he just started to work with Stalin, he said, if there's something to be done but it's impossible to do, call Beria. So he did. A plant was to produce something, though they couldn't manufacture it. Yakovlev told Beria about it. He took up the receiver and said just 3 or 4 words. After the phone call, everything was done. Are there any women here? Dickhead, people's enemy, just 3 words. I didn't come up to Beria, he said, with such requests anymore.
Больше, говорит, я к Берии никогда не обращался по такому вопросу.
You can be sure I will never spare myself, and I will serve our socialist motherland and carry out the orders of Comrade Stalin. After the doctor's case, Stalin became more suspicious and stricter to people, including the guards. Once we were driving as usual. He was accompanied by Zemetin. Turn right, he ordered. The driver certainly turned right. The car was pretty heavy and there was a lot of snow outside. The guys started to dig the car out, and then he launched into a tirade. You always take the same route. You cannot even choose a different route. And he was saying that all with such fury. You want me to be shot. The guys managed to get the car out. They took the same route because, well, you couldn't choose another route there.
Растаял туман, утихла пучина морская, восстал на пути Магадан, столица Колымского края.
He liked to play with numbers. I have an impression there was something mystical in him. I don't know whether it was somehow connected with the fact that he was an Orthodox believer, but he liked to play mystical games. If you try to analyze when the repressions occurred, you will see they are somehow connected with 1917. The first repressions lasted from 1917 to 1927. Well, I cannot say dates are always in close agreement, but still, the dates are quite close. The next date is 1937. It is well known that 1937 and 1938 were the years when the repressions were at their height.
Режиссером сталинских дел был
Many of Stalin's affairs were directed by Trotsky. He was there, abroad, in a foreign land, and was the director. He was simply brilliant. He was a very handsome man and was an excellent orator. Moreover, he had the ability to show himself to the best advantage. All Stalin didn't have went on the sly. All Trotsky wrote was published in newspapers. He wasn't naive at all. He did understand that Stalin knew everything the next day. He wrote that all the highest ranks in the army supported him, and if he came one day, they would certainly take his side. He added that all the intellectuals were on his side too. He wrote that scientists were on his side because they could understand each other very well. And they could not understand Stalin, a slow-witted peasant. Well, if we try to think all these things over and put ourselves in his place, perhaps we could even justify him. In such a situation, everyone would look suspiciously at the people that surrounded them. Besides, in my opinion, Trotsky took into consideration the character of Stalin. He was suspicious, tight-lipped, and cheerless. Well, of course, he had much better characteristics than Stalin. Let's take their intellectual abilities, for instance. When they started fighting, he had much more power than Stalin. He had a certain position in the party. He carried authority with his comrades and boasted a creative genius. And besides, he was a most talented specialist in the study of literature. In spite of the fact that he was a Jew, he knew the Russian culture excellently. Unlike Josef Vissarionovich, he spoke many foreign languages. He had lived abroad for a long time, so I figured he was such an all-rounder. Moreover, he had the gift of the gab. There were only 2 or 3 good orators in the 20th century. The first one was Jean Jaurès, but there's no record of his speeches. The second one was Trotsky, and the third one was Hitler. In my opinion, they were the greatest orators of the century. By the way, Hitler learned to speak in public from Trotsky. He also stole some ideas of his. My father heard one of the last speeches of Trotsky in Baku. He was speaking in front of a big audience with a microphone. His voice was so strong. The speech was so passionate. My father told me he had an unusual face. He had the ability to move his face muscles to make an unforgettable expression. Trotsky was self-conceited. It was written everywhere. He considered himself to be great. He thought his ideas were the best. He felt it was clear he was the leader. He didn't think people that were less smart or unscrupulous were worth to be communicated with. Unlike him, Stalin talked to unscrupulous people with pleasure. Why did he lose? I think the pride was the reason. He did not resemble Stalin at all. The latter could restrain his feelings when it was necessary. Stalin could make any compromise. If he needed a person, he could do anything for him. He turned into an angel and gave him everything he could. The second reason is that Stalin could understand the nature of a person. He could even grovel before a person to a certain extent. And he did understand Trotsky and all people like Kamenev, Zimenoviev, and some others who were in an advantageous position at the time. And he also knew about their phobias. He knew they suffered from an inferiority complex connected with their Jewish origin. Trotsky suffered from it even more than the others. Though I don't know whether this is true. It is said that when Lenin wanted to appoint Trotsky his assistant and even thought he would take his place afterwards, Trotsky replied that a Jew could not be the head of state in Russia. I believe the thing played into Stalin's Stalin's hands. The majority of the opposition members, the leaders, Trotsky, Kamenev, Zinoviev, were Jews. Bukharin was later and was not a serious opponent. If you look at the documents of the time, you will see that Stalin used the anti-Semitic factor. However, he used it pretty cleverly and adroitly. He made some people close to him, especially Kaganovich. He made them his nearest companions in arms. He gave them all chances to rise very rapidly and so on. And he did all that at the same time to cover up the anti-Semitic ground he held. Thus, he made the battle political enough. So you cannot accuse Stalin of being an anti-Semite in the political arena, though he definitely was an anti-Semite in normal life.
Насчет евреев, понимаете, вас интересует. Я ожидал этого вопроса. Значит, и скажу следующее. Что касается...
You're interested in the Jewish issue, aren't you? I knew you would ask me this question. When discussing how Stalin treated the Jews, I'd better refer to the facts.
Факты. Вот вам понимаете, Сталин в 1927 году. У нас имеет...
In 1927, Stalin said, "Our society is affected by a growing anti-Semitic wave."
Вот. Не только в известных кругах средних слоев, но также среди...
I wrote out his phrase full of criticism. There are anti-Semites both in the middle class and in the working class. Stalin criticized anti-Semitism. Now I suggest we analyze the time when matters regarding the Jewish Committee and the Zionism were under consideration.
Одновременно, вот вам понимаете, я специально подобрал.
I found out the names of the people that were rewarded with Stalin Prize at the time of anti-Semitism. Dmitry Pokras in 1941, Matvei Blanter in 1946, Isaac Dunayevsky in 1941, and in 1951, Sergei Eisenstein, a producer in 1941, and in 1946, Lou Trauber in 1941, Emil Gili, a pianist, in 1946, Mark Reisen, a singer, in 1941, Mark Prutkin, an actor, in 1946, in 1947, and in 1949, Fena Ravenskaya in 1949, and in 1951, Samuel Samosid, a bandmaster, in 1941, Mikhail Yosefovich Gurevich, the MiG, Mikoyan, and Gurevich, the plane, were rewarded with Stalin prizes in 1941, in 1947, in 1948, in 1949, in 1952, and in 1953. So what do you think of all that? Do you call it anti-Semitism? What I'm saying is, this is the problem we can be occupied with for a long time. It changed many times, both at the time of Stalin and in this country as well. Many solutions of the problem have already been found. You see, you cannot say for sure. The situation in the 1930s differed greatly from the one that was in the 1940s or in the 50s. USSR was one of the few countries that tried to bravely defend the Jews. That's because the Jews that were in the German occupation zone took the side of the Soviet Russia. 70% of Polish Jews and many others took the side of Russia because it was a chance to be saved. No one gave any choices. Neither did the Americans. Nobody. Any Russian opened its borders for them. So anti-Semitism was out of question. On the other hand, in 1942 and in 1943, Stalin called a secret meeting and put a question of strengthening the patriotism in the country. And the term patriotism in this country is always associated with veiled anti-Semitism. The Jewish people strove for building a state of their own. It is quite a normal wish, is it not? It definitely is. Stalin supported them when they were building the state of Israel. But there is a small thing I would like to pay your attention to. It is even not a small thing. It is an issue of vital importance. When Golda Meir, the Israeli ambassador, came to Stalin, she requested to give them the territory of the Crimea to establish a Jewish republic there. He refused. Then he explained why he had refused. If the thing occurred, the Crimea would become an unsinkable American aircraft carrier. That is the phrase he used. Comrades, you have said a lot of good words about the Stakhanovites at the meeting, and there is little I can add to what has already been said. Still, since you have asked me to mount the platform, I will have to say a few words. The Stakhanovites movement is not a simple movement. The Stakhanovites movement will go down in history of the socialism building as one of its main pages.
Парки чаи расцветает миндаль, снятся твои золотистые косы, снится веселая звонкая даль. Милый, с тобою мы увидимся скоро. Я замечтался над любимым письмом. Пляшут метели в полярных просторах. Северный ветер поет за окном. Парки чаир голубеют пьянки. Снега белее черешен цветы. Снится мне пламень весенний жаркий. Снится мне солнце и море, и ты, весенний жаркий. Снится мне солнце и море,
First, I would like to point out that in percentage terms, our military expenses regarding the total budget are much lesser than in most other countries. I had to deal a lot with the people that had been acquainted with Tukhachevsky. I knew the stableman and the cook that had worked for him, and I also knew the deputy minister of culture who had met him too. Besides, I was acquainted with the comrades that had met with him at the Civil War. And I have never heard anything good about him. Just enemy, enemy, enemy. Let us recall the victories he gained in his life. He poisoned the Tambovsky peasants with poison gas. Nobody used poison gas during the Civil War, and he did. He shed people's blood, and somebody even wanted to publish a book about him titled A Bloody Marshal. It was an organization of espionage, of diversions, of assassinations, and of selling the motherland to our enemies. To the CEC of the USSR Presidium, I repent sincerely of my crimes before the proletarian revolution. I request, if the Presidium doesn't find it discordant to the future deeds of the socialism, to keep me alive, Lev Kamenev. The Gorgins and the Bulanovs, the Krastinskys and the Rosengolds, the Ikramovs, the Hadzenovs and the Cherngoviches, under the guidance of the German, Japanese, Polish, and other secret services, commit their crimes by their masters' orders, both in this country and in China. They also commit crimes in Spain and in all other countries where the class struggle of working people is taking place. They commit their crimes in the countries where honest people fight for freedom, for the true democracy, for the true, authentically human culture.
Будь проклята ты, Колыма, что названа чудной планетой, сойдешь по неволе с ума.
To the CEC of the USSR Presidium. Application. I have described to the proletarian court all the crimes I committed against the Party of the Soviets. The CEC Presidium is aware of them. I beg you to believe that I am not an enemy anymore. I want to give the powers I have to the socialistic motherland of mine. Gregory Zinoviev, 24 August 1934, 4:30 a.m. Dear comrades, I must say I didn't mean to make a speech. But our dear Nikita Sergeyevich made me come here to this meeting. Make, he said, a good speech. What am I supposed to speak about? What kind of speech am I supposed to make? All that had to be said had already appeared in the speeches of our leading comrades. What do I add to those speeches? I believe we have to clarify certain matters. How should we clarify? What matters? All that had to be explained had already been thoroughly explained. What else can I add to those explanations? Well, I could lead a somewhat idle talk about nothing in particular. My speech would certainly amuse the audience. They say there are experts at such speeches not only in capitalistic countries, but also in this country. Well, first of all, I should say that I am not an expert at such speeches. Then do you really think we should amuse ourselves at the time when we, the Bolsheviks, have so many issues to worry about? It is quite clear that under such circumstances one cannot make a good speech. And since I have already mounted the platform, I have to say something. You can expect Comrade Stalin to do his duty. To the people. To the working class. To the peasantry. To the intellectuals.
I don't like to complain about our life being so difficult. Many people had a difficult life. Look around and you will see that so many people in Russia have an extremely difficult life. That is not the point. The point is whether you put up with the way of life you have or not. In my opinion, one should put up. That is my fate, and I learned to live that way. I figure I learned that from some strong, wonderful women that I met in Moscow in the 60s. They came back after a 17 years imprisonment. They had been arrested, put into prison, exiled to Kazakhstan. There were some settlements in the Siberia and a camp. They had been arrested without any reason. All the evidence had been false. And they used to say that in such situations, all you can do is put up with the tragic circumstances. All you could do was just to live with it. If you try to resist and dash against the rock, that will be absolutely of no use. You have to put up with the things that are going on. Well, it is extremely hard for me to accept my mother's death, my mother's suicide to be more precise. But you have to accept it, as there's nothing you can do about it. It was even more difficult to accept my father's death, knowing that the government helped him to die. The doctors hadn't been called for 16 hours. He had the stroke in the early evening. The waitress found him lying on the floor. All that day I wanted to come to him. I wanted to go to his place since lunchtime. I thought I wanted to go to his place, that I wanted to see him. Though I couldn't simply get into the car and set off for his place, in spite of the fact that I was his daughter. There were some rules. I had to call all those guards and ask them if I could phone him. They always answered, "No, you cannot phone him now. He seems to be having a rest. No, you cannot. You cannot call him now." And I couldn't reach him till evening. In the evening, I was utterly exhausted, and I felt I had to go there. In the evening, I went to Lysia Svirnik's place. I told her I had wanted to go to my father's place all day long, and I couldn't. She told me, "Use my telephone." I phoned to all those officials, and the only answer I got was, "No, you may not talk to him." There was turmoil there already because they had found him. However, they didn't tell me anything. And the same evening she told me, "Well, let's go to the movies then." At the time, a film was on there and everybody went to see it. The film that was on was The Station Supervisor, with Moskvin starring in it.
Историю, когда Маша ее звали, да?
It was a story about a girl named Masha that ran away with a hussar. Her father, an old man, wanted to find her. However, Masha didn't, froze to death.
Маша не замерзает.
I started sobbing bitterly. I can still remember that I was sobbing violently. I started crying and couldn't stop. She tried to calm me down. By the end of the film, Masha and her family, her husband and the children, came to her father's grave. She fell on it and burst out crying. And I was crying bitterly too. I could not stop. Then I understood that I felt he was calling for me. In the morning I went to the academy I studied at. We were having a French lesson when they asked me to come out of the class, and we went to the summer cottage. And then I realized that the previous evening, and at night as well, I heard somebody calling for me. Well, when I came to the place, I found him. When I came there, I thought he was gone already, but it turned out he was still alive. And the next 3 or 4 days, he was still alive.
There was an asphalt path near the house, and Mishka Suslov was rushing about there. He was wearing a long coat. The hat of his was pulled over his eyes. And he was also wearing rubbers. He was the only one that rushed about here. He had never been at the master's place before. And I had no idea what brought him there. Beria with Melenkov were there as well. Khrushchev, Bulganin, and Lazar Moisich Mukoyan came too. He was dying here, lying on the sofa. But he fell unconscious in that room. A lot of medical equipment was brought here. There were so many medical devices, different medicine and doctors here. The only person who hadn't cried until it was broadcasted was Svetlana Yosifovna. She seemed to have turned into a stone. She drove the car and must have gone to her children. It was so hard for her. She's just a woman. She should have cried, should have somehow relieved the strain. All those people that were there cried. Nikita Khrushchev and Bulganin shed tears as well. Beria was the first to come out of the house. He cried at the top of his voice. Krustalev, get into the car. His driver was also Krustalev, a person bearing the same surname. Why did he cry so loudly? The car had to be brought from the service area here to the doorway. Krustalev came out and was a very calm, stout man. He sighed and said, "All is over. Comrade Stalin is gone." Russia was lucky to be ruled by a genius and a steadfast commander, Stalin, in time of severe trials. He was an outstanding figure. He was the person the country needed at the changing and cruel time. Stalin was a person of boundless energy. He was a strong-willed person. He was harsh, severe, and cruel when talking to somebody. I was taught here in the British Parliament, and still I couldn't oppose him. First of all, I must say that Stalin was a man of humor. His remarks were dripping with sarcasm, and he had the ability to clearly understand what an interlocutor wants to say, and the ability to express his own thoughts clearly. This ability of his was so great that Stalin seemed unique among the leaders of all countries and of all nations. We were greatly impressed by Stalin. He was a person of logical and sensible wisdom. He had the ability to find a way out of a most hopeless situation. Besides, at either critical junctures or at celebrations, Stalin was self-restrained, and he never gave way to illusions. He was a very peculiar person. He made and overrode an immense empire. This was a person that could eliminate his enemy with the help of another enemy of his. Stalin was a great dictator. He had no equal in the world. When he came to power, wooden plows were still used in Russia. When he died, Russia already possessed nuclear weapons. This is the phrase of what Churchill said after Stalin's death. It was published in the British Encyclopedia. All Muscovites went to the funeral. Everybody. All people wanted to attend the funeral. They wanted to do that with an open heart. Nobody asked them to come. Nobody made anybody come. Nobody said, "Let's go to the funeral." It all happened so spontaneously. All decided to go, and they did. In the hall, I stood close to the coffin. I watched people walking. They all cried. There was no man that was not crying. Well, yes, some people were run over there. The Neglinaya Street was crowded with people. There were soldiers standing there with automobiles. And they decided not to let people in as the street was overcrowded. People were squeezing into the street and started to propel those that had been stopped by the truck. I consider it was all poorly organized, and that is all. We didn't take Stalin for a human being. He was a demigod, anything, but not a human being. He was the one everybody was ready to sacrifice their life to. We could do anything he wished to be done. Once I heard a phrase like this: "Give your heart to him, and it will be placed into his chest." I would certainly agree, and I would not utter a word.
So the 20th Congress began. The Congress at which the cult of personality was discussed. All those speeches they made seemed so false to me, because I knew pretty well what the people that made the speeches were like. Though I was still young, I understood that they should first reveal the crimes they had committed. Only then they could accuse him of anything.
Do you remember the biography of Alexander Macedonian? There was a group of his closest associates around him. When he died, they, his associates, even forgot to have him buried. He had been in Persepolis, in Meduch, for a month. Then, finally, Panteleimon decided to take out of there. Then, somebody wanted to steal the body. And what did the story end in? There is not even a grave of Alexander Macedonian. The dominant role of his was in the state affairs. I am 100% sure the role of his cannot be determined by the things he was doing. The things he was doing while alive were of almost no significance. However, all that remained after him is of real importance. It is important to realize what has happened to the social project he was carrying out. What happened to the USSR? What happened to that country? USSR is a brainchild of Stalin, that is for sure. And in 1991, it collapsed. Stalin's grandeur was dearly bought, at a cost of people's lives and of natural resources, consumption he created in Chimera. Stalin's biography reminds me of a play by Grisha Gorin, God rest his soul. At the end of the play, the new ruler, after he had denounced Herostratus and had him executed, demanded a white marble plaque to be hung on the wall of the church, which had been burnt down by Herostratus. The marble plaque should have been engraved with gold letters, "Forget Herostratus." You see, there is no need to write, "Forget Stalin," in a placard to place it at the Red Square. If you are a political leader, pursue a deliberate policy for people not to think badly of you once you are gone. Never forget the sacrifices you have made.